Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Cutting Room here in New York City. Tonight, I'm honored to present and interview a gentleman that not only is a very important drummer to the world of rock music, but he's a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer as well as an innovator. Drummer Danny Seraphine is one of the co-founding members of Chicago. And this gentleman in the late 60s, in the 70s, fused jazz into rock music. Now, tonight he's performing music with his group, the California Transit Authority, in which he revisits a lot of the Chicago classics. And it's also fronted by guest vocalist, Mr. Bill Champlin, who was also part of Chicago. Tonight, Danny and I had a chance to sit down and talk about his deep jazz roots, how he developed into a proficient drummer, as well as how he took his skills and motivated a lot of other jazz drummers in the fold many years after he started the group. Also, we sat down and reflect on some of his time with Chicago, as well as talk about some of the most important traits that a musician needs to have, including drummers, to become a better musician. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of Mr. Danny Seraphine live performing music with his group, the California Transit Authority, live here at the Cutting Room as part of the Pace Report here in New York City. Danny, it is an honor to be sitting down with you. And I want to start this interview off by painting a picture of the late 60s. And at the time, music was at a different cross section. You had guys like Sly Stone, you had bands like Chicago, you had Led Zeppelin. There were all kinds of music genres going around: funk, rock, blues, jazz. And you and a young drummer by the name of Bobby Colomby were pretty much one of the first guys to bridge jazz with rock music. How did you do that at a very young age?
Well, if you go back to my early history of drumming, my first drum hero was Gene Krupa, right? And so he always had that big band kind of, flair, and there was a movie out at the time when I was a kid called The Gene Krupa Story, right? And they had a soundtrack, and I used to play along with it. I stole a bunch of licks off of there. In fact, when I listened, I'm a man, and there's some actual Gene Krupa licks off of some of the solos, in there. So thank you, Gene. And so that kind of started me. I played traditional, right? And so I pretty much predominantly play traditional. I play both matched. And so that kind of infused jazz into my playing at a very early age. And so then I went on and it was just more of a rock and a funk drummer because I was in Chicago and there were so many great local, drummers, African-American guys, cats that just were so funky. And also the Motown groove was just ingrained. It's ingrained in my pocket. So, I have this strange combination of jazz, funk, and of course rock. And around the age of 17, I met. Actually, I was 18. Excuse me. Around the age of 18, I met a teacher through one of the guys that were in the band Chicago, the sax player Walt Pearsuter. He introduced me to the head of percussion at DePaul University, and he came to one of our club gigs. And he transcribed what I was playing. And after the show, Walt introduced me and he said, "Hey, did you realize you're playing?" And I wasn't that great a reader, so it looked pretty complicated. And he said, I think you could be something really special. And he said, I would like, why don't you come and I'll work with you, once or twice a week. And I said, but I never graduated high school. He said, doesn't matter. Just come after school. And his name was Bob Tillis. And he really ignited me. He really turned me into a musician, so to speak, right? I started thinking dynamics and technique and the things that set a drummer or a musician apart to make them really special. And that's where, and kind of simultaneously, while this was going on, and I'm really it's like an awakening for me, so to speak, right? The band Chicago, what eventually evolved into being the band Chicago Transit Authority, we were starting to formulate our sound, and a lot of it was horn driven, which I love playing with horns because the first band I played with Terry Kath and Walt Pearsuter was a horn band. So basically, I was learning these licks, these kind of jazz things, these stretched out, and I was just finding ways to integrate it into the music, and that's where it began.
You growing up in Chicago, you had Chess Records, Brunswick. I mean, you had a lot of... Chicago was interesting because Curtis Mayfield was doing his thing there. Right. And I have to ask you, you had a myriad of all of these music ideas. What was it and why was it jazz that you gravitated to the most?
I think as a drummer, it just naturally, it felt natural to me, It felt natural. And I've always had good hands. And then when Bob Tillis developed that even more, it just was a natural, But so is funk. I mean, R&B is really deeply ingrained. If you listen to Make Me Smile, that's an R&B groove, Yeah. That's an R&B groove. But at the end, then there's the Buddy Rich kind of Gene Krupa lick, So I think, and I was really fortunate to be with a band that I was able to, take what I was learning and kind of fuse it into the music, you know. And it was really kind of it was evolutionary in a sense, because the band was, the Jimmy Panko's writing had a lot of jazz horn kicks and things like that, and Terry Cass, they all kind of, and so they encouraged that too. So it was encouraged to stretch the limits.
And I want to talk about the first 3 Chicago albums. Definitely the first album. You guys go out to California. In January of 1969, you guys recorded that first record in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that was kind of like shock treatment. I'd never really been in the studio, I mean, in a serious way. I'd been in the studio with, kind of local, kind of, half-assed, but that was my first experience of really being under the microscope, and it really scared me. And so, I didn't realize how good it was until long after the fact. I really kind of thought, oh God, I didn't do very good. I could have played so much better. And really, when I listen to it, it's really, it's not my best work, but it's some of it.
I'm going to say the first 2 records you guys recorded were, I think, groundbreaking in a sense. And I want to say the first 4 songs on the first record are insane, especially that introduction. We start one area,
yeah,
and we're going to like 4 or 5 phases in that. Was it 7, 8 minutes?
6 minutes.
6 minutes.
I think it's a 6-minute cut. It's wonderful. It's got all these 19/8 times. Got 3/4, 4/4. Got tempo changes. Yeah, it's a great piece of music. Still to this day, it's challenging. I still play it with this band, with my new band, CTA, California Transit Authority. We do it.
Now, the production part, and your producer at the time, how did he get you guys focused as far as how the band was supposed to go and how they were supposed to sound?
Well, he really was great at producing brass, and so he really got what we wanted to do and how to do it, and it was just kind of worked hand in hand. Again, he really worked on incredible drum sounds. We spent a long time getting drum sounds, and I think we did it on an 8-track, the first album. So it might have been 16. No, it was 8, and I think then it went to 16 for the next album. And he was James William Gershaw he was known for producing brass and producing it well.
Yeah, I mean, that second Blood, Sweat, and Tears record is insane.
Yeah.
And he produced all of your records up to 7 or 8?
No, 11 was the last one.
11 was the last one. 11.
Yeah.
Tell me about the period of the 70s, because the 70s, again, was another, we leave the 60s, the turbulent 60s, and we go into an era called FM radio, and you guys were writing and recording songs that were longer than 3 or 4 minutes, standard top 40.
Oh, yeah.
And it actually kind of helped you guys when it came down to playing colleges and universities.
Without a doubt, yeah, because we were all over. Well, we couldn't get on AM radio, which is what you had to do to break big in those days. But we were all over FM and the college stations, so it was a natural. So we just started playing every college in the country and that you can think of. You know,
I understand. I did a lot of research on you. When you got to California, you had to do some more studying, and it took your drumming to a very different level as far as your technique and how you executed what you were playing and how you thought it out.
yeah, I studied with a jazz drummer by the name of Chuck Flores, and he really got what I was trying to do, and he really helped me take that last step. You know, develop my foot. You know, and also develop my jazz chops even more. You know, and then I had the privilege of studying with Papa Joe Jones, which was a lifetime. That's like a gift of a lifetime. You know, studying with the great Papa Joe Jones. You know,
How do you take with Papa Joe Jones? Because I understand he's the guy that introduced you to brush skills.
yeah, yes. Well, he also taught me how to swing.
Really?
He really taught me how to swing. You know, I always had that the good swing in my playing, and I had that kind of natural. But Papa Joe showed me how to really swing hard. You know.
How did you transform that into your playing with Chicago and outside of Chicago?
It just does. You know. All of a sudden, whenever I get a chance, or you know, have any kind of a shuffle thing, or any kind of a swing thing, even within the rock thing, I love to swing.
Let's talk about the California Transit Authority.
Mm-hmm.
This is a group that you put together, and you're playing a lot of the Chicago songs, and this is really kind of your offering to a lot of the jazz fans and also the Chicago fans who, because we know about the rift between you and Chicago, this is something that you decided to move forward with.
Yeah. Well, I'm so identified with Chicago music, and it's a wonderful body of work that I was an important part of. As everybody in the band, we were all important in making those, you know, 16 or 18, 19 albums. You know, so when it got taken away from me, so to speak, it left a big void in my life. So, and also, that's what people want to hear Danny play.
Right.
So, I don't fight it anymore. I just do it, and because I love it. I'm very proud of that music. I'm very proud of my contributions to it, and I'm going to continue playing it. I want to play other music as well, but I'm very proud of the Chicago legacy.
And you also have another former Chicago vocalist in the band also as well.
Yeah, Bill Champlin. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Bill and I, we didn't talk for like 22 years, I believe it was. And when he left Chicago, he approached me, and we mended fences, and, you know, and we're really great friends again, and making music and having a good time.
You know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I just think it was a travesty that it took so long for you guys to get in there. But you're in there.
Yeah.
You're in there. Did being on that stage with all of these guys after all these years, are there some fences that were mended, or are there some things still up in there with Chicago in your future with them? Or do you wanna do some stuff with them again?
Well, I would really consider doing something with them again, but it would have to be under the right circumstances, you know. And yeah, I wanted that to be like a very healing, mend the fences kind of. Let's enjoy the legacy we created together, and it just didn't happen. So, you know, life's got all these mysteries. You know, you can't always have all these answers to them. I wish them the best. I love those guys. I love Peter Cetera and I are good friends. You know. Bill Champlin and I are good friends. Jason, who just left them, you know, maybe a year, 2 years ago, and him and I are now good friends. So, you know, I don't really rule out the possibility of us being close friends again. I don't know about me playing with them again. They're in a different space than I am, and I like playing with this band. I love playing with this band, as a matter of fact, and we do the music as good as anybody in the planet.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
I could imagine. You know, I want to talk about a couple of your highlights of the band of Chicago. And This record, I always said, is one of your best records. And it was shunned by the public because I guess disco was going out, but Street Player.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the lineup on that song. You've got Maynard Ferguson on trumpet.
Right.
And you got Ayrton on percussion.
Yeah, Ayrton on Lausure de Oliveira, the late, great Lausure de Oliveira. Yeah.
How did that get together?
I talked to our producer, the late, great Phil Ramone, and I played the song for him, and I said, let's do the greatest disco song of all time. Let's just do, the most amazing piece of music. Let's elevate disco with this song. I mean, it's a little bit of it's kind of a lofty kind of, and we made this great record, and the record company was all jazzed about it. They put this video together, right? And then, lo and behold, the timing, it's like being at the right place at the wrong time, right? A disc jockey in Chicago orchestrated this, what was called Disco Demolition at Comiskey Park, which is the White Sox baseball stadium. And 50,000 people came with their disco record that they wanted to burn in effigy. And ours was on top. Oh, man. It just broke my heart. I mean, oh, my God. It was like I think it was God's way of saying, I was kind of rehearsing my Grammy speech. I was really thinking I was really something, because this song was about me. This was and I was so emotionally attached to it, and it just got stomped, But lo and behold, 10 years was it after I left the band? Like 10 years after I left the band, a group out of England called the Bucketheads released it, and they sampled it and released it in a dance thing, and it was the biggest dance hit of 1998, right? And I just couldn't believe it. I made a lot of money. So that was God's way of saying, you wrote a great song, but you weren't ready to handle it, So I had to hold you back. So here's a little payback for you, because we knew it was a great song and it was great work. And I look up and I go, thank you. Every time those checks would arrive, and they were big. There were some big, crazy. I'm going, thank you, God, And then 10 years, so 10 years marches on. It's 2008. I get a call from the lady who handles my copyright, saying, Pitbull, a hip-hop artist by the name of Pitbull, wants to sample your song. But he wants to, I want you to hear it and give him the okay to use it. And I said, go ahead, tell him to use it, And it was bigger than the first one.
Jesus.
I mean, it was just huge, that I know you want me.
Yeah. He
just used like 8 bars or 6, or 4 bars in Street Player. So, it was what turned out to be my biggest failure has, in the long run, turned out to be my biggest success. It's a good story.
It is a good story. I want to go back to 70s, because the whole jazz rock thing was in full swing. What was your idea, or what did you think of guys like Narada Michael Walden, who was playing with Jeff Beck, who was doing what you were doing in a more technical form, and Billy Cobham?
Oh, I loved him. Loved Billy, and I loved Narada. What year did Narada hit the scene as far as?
I believe, didn't the big record with Goodbye Pork Pie Hat came out in 73, 74. That was, 73, 74.
Right.
So you were kind of ahead of the curve, and then you saw a new generation of drummers coming out and doing what you were doing.
I mean, I felt, I was very flattered. I heard a lick that I did on a record, and I heard Billy kind of do it, and I thought, God, he's such a great drummer. If I influenced him, that would be a great honor. Same thing with Narada Michael Walden. He has told me that I was an influence on him, and he's such a great musician, and producer.
part of the interview where I asked the jazz master or the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer to reflect on the influences of their life and what they did musically and how it affected you as a musician. And the first one we'll go back to is Gene Krupa.
Yeah. Well, Gene played with such passion and a flair, and he rose to the top and then fell, when he went to jail because they caught him with drugs or whatever, and he made his comeback, and it was inspiring, it showed me, and he was from Chicago as well, so I always related to Gene Krupa, and I still do, I still relate to Gene Krupa. So he's been unfortunately, I never got to know Gene, and I should have. I mean, I never got to meet him. I met everybody else and hung with everybody else, but Gene was already, left the scene.
The next one, and this guy said you were his favorite drummer, and that's the great Buddy Rich.
Yeah, I was his favorite rock drummer. Yeah. Well, that's like God saying to you, you're doing good, kid.
Doing good, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to put Buddy at that level, but he is a drum god, And so when I heard that, I went, I'm not worthy, And I still say I'm not worthy. But I got to know Buddy really well, and I spent some really good moments with him. So Buddy still is an inspiration. He's like, Buddy is the bar that he's the standard that we strive for, as far as technical and combination of technical excellence and musicianship.
The next one, and I read some interesting comments you said about this guy. And he was kind of like a one-of-a-kind like you. You were kind of a child prodigy like this guy was. He started when he was 17 years old, Tony Williams.
Oh, God, Tony. Tony was so innovative. And, Tony was like maybe the first jazz guy to play with rock dynamics, Man, he could kick. He could kick it, and he could come down in his dynamics. He did play match, but he played wonderfully with traditional grip. An ultimate, one of the all-time. I mean, some people think he's the greatest of all time. He could very well be. I mean, I think Buddy. I don't think there'll ever be another Tony Williams. I don't think there'll ever be another Buddy Rich. And that goes to say about Elvin Jones too, and Joe Jones. Joe Jones was, to me, the best. The most tasteful, the most artistic, and the coolest cat you'd ever want to meet.
And I think the next one that I want to bring up is really not a clone, but I think he really took the rudiments from him and he kind of took it to another level. That's Max Roach.
Oh, Max was... I always look at as Tony was an extension of Max, Really? Tony really was influenced by Max, big time. So, because I heard a lot when I heard Max Roach, I got to hear him at a club in Harlem. My friend Grady Tate, the late Grady Tate, the great,
yes.
Took me to hear Max Roach for the first time, and I sat behind him and I said, "Wow, that's where Tony Williams comes from." You know what I mean? That's the school, and Max Roach is one of the greatest of all time. I mean, these are, who's better? They're different. You love them for their different. Max was so incredibly artistic, but technically proficient. He had all the speed you could ever want, but he had an amazing musicianship, dynamics. And
you brought up Grady Tate. God rest his soul.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time I met him. He gave me some jewels that I always remember. Of all the drummers, and this man has recorded over some 3,000 recording dates, pop, jazz, and soul. Why is it that Grady doesn't get the accolades like a lot of his contemporaries?
Grady was not a flashy drummer. He just had the ultimate pocket. He had such an amazing smooth, he had a great, amazing jazz swing pocket, but he also had the Jimmy Smith stuff he used to play on Walk on the Wild Side. Yeah. Really dynamic, great musician. He's a great singer, but I loved his drumming. He was so tasteful. So Grady had a big influence on me as a man and as a player, because he kind of took me under his wing when I first came out to New York. I got to hang with Grady, and we were close friends. My first drum clinic was in conjunction with Grady Tate in Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So I've been very blessed. I've been really lucky. you know, you have to just, I'm really grateful.
Woke up one day and saw the flame, naked and alone. Doesn't matter who you blame or what we think we own. I see the way I should have been, but don't wait. I've come full circle, now I'm finally home. I've come full circle, all I've ever known. Now I'm coming home. I know I brought this on myself. Little too close to see the signs. I should have known just what you made to me. Once upon a long, long, long time. Now I'm free falling once again. I've come full circle, and now I'm finally home. I've come full circle. Getting you if I'm gonna call me home. We do call me home. You showed me how to see myself face to face to face to face and clear. It's simple now. I'm looking back. The promised land was always near. Yeah.
Bill, I want to ask you the very first time you met Danny, joining the group Chicago. What were your first opinions of him?
Well, when I first met Danny, I got a call from a guy named Angelo who I'd done an album with years before on Fantasy Records, and I'd done the album with the producer was Mike Stewart. And this guy Angelo had the sweetest, biggest voice I'd ever heard. Danny apparently, I mean, I didn't even know this. I kind of lost touch with Angelo, but Danny was producing some of Angelo's stuff. Angelo was the ex-husband of Danny's current wife at the time, right? So it was kind of I found all this out later. But he called me. I was right in the middle of doing the Rittenhour album, the Rit album. And I was really tired. We were working late dates, and I was just a mess. He called me at 9 in the morning. He says, "Can I get you to come do background vocals for free?" And that'll get you a cold quicker than anything. You know what I mean? I said, "Angelo, man, I got a really bad cold." He said, well, Pete said the same thing. I said, "Pete? Who's Pete?" He said, "Peter Cetera." He said the same thing, but he said he's going to come anyway. I went, "I'll be singing with Cetera? I'm there. I'll be there." So I went to the session. And Danny was producing the session, and we went out. Peter and I very quietly came up with some parts. We went out on the microphone and just sang together for 2 or 3 bars, and we looked at the people in the booth, and everybody's tongue was hanging out, going, dig that! How cool was that blend? So that's kind of how I met Danny, and then we wrote a song together after that. After we kind of met each other, And that was sort of the beginning of my scene with Danny.
You know,
long time ago.
long time ago, and you joined Chicago, and you guys.
Thanks to Danny.
Thanks to
Yeah.
Danny, right? And you guys are going all over the world, and you're recording together. What is it about his musicianship? What does he bring to the table, and how does he enhance the band as a whole, or even with this band tonight?
Well, with this band tonight, even more so, I think, than in Chicago. Danny just has a certain style, and we were just hanging out in the back room with Will Lee. He's like one of the better musicians in the world, and he said, "Man, every time I play with Danny, I've realized what made that stuff tick." I didn't altogether get it that much. It was, I was doing record dates with Jeff Beccaro and different people. Danny was, had a definite style, had a definite thing going on, and I was aware of it long before I even met him. Like, this guy's got some chops, he's got chops on his chops on his chops. And then, I was kind of leaned toward Jim Keltner and, James Gadsden. And that was my kind of, because I'm more of an R&B musician, to start with.
Right.
So I didn't quite get it. And then when I started doing this CTA stuff, I really got it way more. It made more sense to me, and I think he's playing now better than he was then. Because he's a little more dedicated to the pocket, whereas opposed to when he was younger, he was really more dedicated about showing off. You got that kind of chops,
right?
And I think he had all the Buddy Rich kind of, the guys he looked up to, Max Roach and Buddy Rich and Morello and just all the cats that are, major league guys. I think it seemed like they were all kind of showing off, and Danny was, has a certain level of that going himself. But I think with this thing, he's got a little bit more of a pocket.
The thing that I've always noticed about, and I've seen you guys, the thing that I've noticed that everyone feels comfortable playing with him.
Sometimes, most of the time, everybody feels, I feel comfortable playing with anybody until I don't. You know what I mean? It's just sort of the way it is. Sometimes you have a night where it's something just doesn't hit. But I think that's just like the wind sometimes blows and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes you get a great one, sometimes you don't. The other night I had a stellar night, absolute stellar night. The next night, everything that could break on the stage broke. Everything. Every keyboard I touched, every instrument, every microphone. The monitors were horrible. The guitar I was playing with bad. It was just one of those. And I just went, that's because I had a stellar night last night. And it just happens. But the thing is, it's really cool with this day and age. Everybody's so into doing it just like the record, I can't stand that. It makes me crazy. Why don't you play like it's today and you're on the stage playing instead of going out and playing like it used to be? Yeah, of course we all understand there are certain signatures you have to state in order for people to recognize the song. And you state it enough times to get it over with. And then at that point in the game, have fun, man. Be musical. That's kind of one of the things about Danny. It's really cool. It's like he's a little more musical than he used to be. He used to be, let's play it like a record all the time. And that gets old for me. And I think it does for the audience, to tell you the truth. If you're just doing exactly what you did on Tuesday afternoon, on a February 4th, 1967, and having to go back to that place and be that guy every night for the rest of your life.
Can't do it.
I can't do it, And that's why I love this. This band's really good. We got, 5 really good singers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 at least. Great singers, and we just work on the vocals and make the vocals work instead of fly them. Because the minute you fly them, you're into click tracks. The minute you're into click tracks, you're into the song has to be this long. What happens if the guitar player is just smoking and needs more? And your sequence only goes so, it's great for performing the same thing over and over again, but it doesn't give you any motion to any room to breathe. So that's just my whole scene. I know we kind of got off the Danny subject, but he kind of agrees to it. It's like, man, if we sing it well, it's not going to be doubled. It's not going to be the perfect, auto-tune doubles coming up on Pro Tools sequences. It's going to be these guys singing right here, right now. And we, I just try to make sure everybody sings in tune. Simple as that.
Danny, what are some of the things that you want the next generation of musicians, including drummers, to do as well as learn to become more proficient in their craft, but also become very diverse? Because you have played and have done a lot of diverse recordings throughout your career.
Well, what I would really like to tell the young players is, you hear all these amazing licks now, all these fast, incredible licks, but find out where they came from originally. Go back to the roots of drumming, and listen to Max Roach, listen to Joe Jones, of course, listen to Buddy Rich, listen to Gene Krupa, listen to Philly Joe Jones, listen to Elvin Jones, yeah, that's where it all started. And those guys were warriors. Tony Williams, they had some times where they made pretty good money, but they did it for the love of it. So, and not only the drummers, those are the guys I would say listen to, but listen to the Thelonious Monk, right? And then listen to Hal Blaine, who's a great, Hal Blaine's a wonderful session drummer, played on so many hits. And take from that, and then take from that, and let that influence you, and then do your thing with that.
Who were some of your contemporaries in the late 60s and 70s in the rock groups? Who were some of the great rock drummers that you were in awe of?
Well, obviously John Bonham, I think, was great. I really loved Mitch Mitchell with Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, I knew Mitch really well. Hal Blaine was always, I think, a guy that I really emulated, especially in some of my fills and my grooves. James Brown's drummers, Tubfield, Clayton Filiard, just there's a lot of that in my playing. The Motown guys, Uriel Jones and Pistol, Pistol, and those guys really, really influenced me. There's more, but those are, the rock guys. Those were the main guys, and my close friend Liberty DeVito, who's a great, played on Billy Joel's records, and Carmine Appice, a great rock drummer. So I get something from all of them, Hey.
You worked with, speaking of Liberty and Carmine, you worked with the late Phil Ramone. And Phil Ramone was not only an excellent engineer, he was a great record producer. In fact, I read his autobiography, and one of the things that he did was, especially with Billy Joel, the reason why his early records weren't as good as the records that he produces because he used Billy's original band in the studio and captured everything.
Yeah.
When he worked with you in Chicago, what did he do to enhance your sound?
He just made it so easy to create. He created such a great environment, The first time I worked with him was just as an engineer. And he was working, we were doing our Chicago special up in the Rockies, So I had my drums set up, and I had them tuned loosely. There was no dampening hardly, and, maybe a little bit on the snare, but everything was ringing, the bass drum had, and I said to him, what do you need me to do to my drums? He said, nothing, they sound great. He just placed the mics, and man, did they sound good. But that was my first introduction to Phil. He was just a joy to work with. Such a great person, such a great friend. I miss him to this day.
Let me tell you something. When I was 17 years old, I went to a place in Oceanside, Long Island called the Action House. I went to see another band that was on the main stage, but to my left there was a small stage, and on that stage was Chicago. It was the first time I ever saw them. They were Chicago Transit Authority. I thought, this band is amazing. They blew me away. And then you got a drummer that Buddy Rich didn't talk much about other drummers, but he mentioned that Danny was one of his favorite new drummers that's around. How great could it get after that? I mean, he's fantastic.
Danny, he was a groundbreaking drummer in the 60s, his late 60s and 70s, along with John Bonham, who was one of his contemporaries. How did they both change the game as far as the dynamics of the music?
Well, Danny is to big band what Stuart Copeland is to Police to reggae. That's what Danny does with big band. He takes big band and puts it into rock, like Stuart Copeland took reggae and put it into rock music. And John Bonham to me was an R&B drummer that played on a huge set and became this great R&B type of rock drummer. I mean, they changed the world in the way we think about drums.
Danny Seraphine, what does jazz music mean to you?
It means everything to me. I mean, because it's the sensitivity, it means the roots, the African American roots. To me, that's the epitome of jazz. You know, yes, you know, it's where it came from. The Miles, you know, it's Coltrane, Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, and I've got, and you know, of course, Buddy Rich, you know, and Joe Jones, you know, being able to learn so much from Joe Jones, right? The brush thing, you know, the swing thing, and you know, it has meant to me. It's a challenge that I always feel I need to live up to. So it's a standard for me.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Cutting Room here in New York City. I'd like to personally congratulate and thank the incomparable Mr. Danny Seraphine for his time, as well as Mr. Bill Champlin, as well as comments from Mr. Will Lee and Liberty DeVito. Make sure you go out and support the California Transit Authority, which is coming to a city near you. For more information, please visit Danny's website at www.dannyseraphine.com. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Cutting Room for their warm hospitality. As always, please visit my website for my weekly column as well as my past segments at www.thepacereport.com. As always, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.
When I'm away